Hello everyone and welcome to the last day of the second day of the World Rapid Championship. It's Magnus Carlsen versus Jan-Krzysztof Duda, and it's a game that really did not end as one would expect, simply because of what was happening all the time, but as the title suggests, it most certainly did happen. So let's check it out and then we're gonna discuss it a little bit more and the current situation in the tournament. So Magnus with the white pieces opens with e4. We have c5, Duda goes for the Sicilian defense, knight f3, and now knight to f6, going after the e4 pawn. The so-called Nimzowitsch variation of the Sicilian. We have e5 by Magnus, knight to d5, and now knight to c3, offering black to double up white's pawns. Duda goes for this, knight captures, d captures, and now knight to c6. And here there are a couple of moves that are very popular here, like bishop f4, bishop d3, bishop c4, but Magnus goes for h4, and it is not only as of move 6, already as of move 6, that we have a completely new game. We have e6, Duda continues development, and bishop to f4. We have queen to c7, and now the e5 pawn is nicely defended, so you don't have to worry about this, and queen to d2, Magnus signaling that he might be ready to castle queen side. We have h6, and now bishop to d3. We have b6, you have to develop the light square bishop somewhere, and bishop to e4 now. We have bishop to b7, and here Magnus goes for c4, gaining more control over the b5 and d5 squares, and Duda immediately goes for the trade. Knight to a5, offering a trade of light square bishops. Magnus accepts this, we have captures, and now Magnus castles queen side. We have queen to c6, and now queen to c3, we have bishop to e7, and now Magnus plays rook to d3. He wants to bring the other rook to d1 and put a lot of pressure along the d file, but maybe a little bit more precise, or at least it would prevent Duda from achieving what he did. Would have been to maybe play rook to e1. It would be slower, but it would prevent queen coming to e4. This is exactly what Duda does. It's a very nice centralizing move, and from here the queen does, well, just puts out a lot of pressure. The bishop is also being threatened, so b3 defending the g3, defending the bishop, and knight to a5 now, putting pressure on the c4 pawn. And already, because the queen was allowed to e4, this is a lot to take in, and it's not easy to defend this pawn. You could play b3, but Magnus wants to avoid playing this b3 move, as it further weakens the queen side. So rook h to d1, going after the d7 pawn, but Duda just defends it, and still the c4 pawn is being threatened, so Magnus goes knight to d2, defends, attacks the queen, and well, for the moment he will not be playing b3. We have queen back to f5, and now rook to f3, threatening some nasty discoveries because the queen is on f5, but Duda just plays knight back to c6, and here he really makes Magnus think, because why would he allow this, for example, bishop captures on h6, just grabbing a pawn? Well, it's actually a very interesting idea. Magnus does capture on h6, it is the best move in the position, and Duda just plays knight to d4. Point being that if the queen is captured, then Duda has this knight to e2 fork, checking the king, attacking the queen, and after the king moves, we're going to capture the queen again with check. This will force white to triple his c pawn, and now, for example, he captures on f5, and the black's position is just better because even though you can capture here, it doesn't matter. For example, rook h7, the triplet c pawn is just disgusting here. So instead, after knight to d4, Magnus goes for queen captures on d4. We have queen captures on f3, so Duda wins the exchange. Knight captures on f3, c captures on d4, and now bishop captures on g7. We have rook to h7, attacking the bishop, and bishop to f6. Now the bishops get traded off as well. We have captures, rook to h6, goes after the pawn. Magnus captures on d4, Duda captures on f6, and Magnus now plays f4. And this is the position that we have on move 27, where Magnus is down the exchange, but he is up 2 pawns. Now, what can Duda do to get his rooks into the game? Well, it's very unlikely that you will be able to break through on the queen side. Magnus can just play b3, and you are not getting through. b5 is not happening. The knight covers that. So your best bet is to go after the g3 pawn, but it's also very easy for Magnus to defend this. Here we have king e7. Duda prepares to go after the pawn. Rook to d3. Magnus already already defends it. We have rook to c8, first putting pressure on this pawn, b3 defending it, and now rook to g6. And now, as the g3 pawn will get attacked one more time, Magnus defends it preemptively, knight to e2. We have rook c to g8, and now just king to d2. So for the moment, the Duda cannot do anything here. The knight nicely defends the g3 pawn, and Magnus will even bring the king over to f3 so he can further activate his rook. So d6 and now a4 by Magnus. We have e5 trying to open up the position. We have rook to f3. We have rook to g4 by Duda, and now king to e3. So for the moment, the position is fine for both players. Magnus has 6 minutes on the clock. Duda is already below 3 minutes. And if you, for example, trade here, captures, 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 and captures, it's, again, just a position where white will be the one that's pushing. He has the passed h-pawn, and it's not going to be easy for black to stop this, and the white is still up 2 pawns. So instead, after king e3, we have king to e6. Now comes king to f2, adding another defender here, while still asking black, what are you going to play? Even though he does have 2 rooks, they are completely useless here. We have rook to g7, rook to e3 now. We have king to f5, getting the king away from the e-file, and rook to d3 now. Magnus goes after the d6 pawn. We have king back to e6, and now rook to d5, with some ideas of maybe preparing a5 to bust open the queen side. We have rook to g8, and now king to f3. So this rook cannot move because this rook is attacked. We have a6 by Duda. And now if Magnus tries some sort of a pawn push, then maybe, for example, a5, we can play b5. But here we have rook back to d1 by Magnus. Interestingly, you could play f5 here, and it's a very nice idea. Because if captures, we're going to capture on d6, and now, okay, we're going after those pawns. For example, rook to g6, we can play rook to d7, and it's not an easy position for black to be in. For example, rook to f6 would defend the pawn. There are even tricks with knight to f4. So this is what's in the position. But even after, for example, captures, we're going to play rook d5 check, kick the black king away from the defense of the rook, king e6, king captures on g4. Let's say f3. It's very unlikely that white will be able to push for more than a draw here in a rapid game. For example, rook to d1. Now king e5, and it's, well, it's just looking very, very... well, drawish at the moment. So instead, after this a6 move, Magnus goes back. We have rook to d1. Now we have king to e7, and only now Magnus advances this pawn to f5. We have rook 4 to g7, and this is a move that Duda should not have played, because now the position is winning for Magnus, but it's a tricky one. So feel free to pause the video here and win the game for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on figuring out it's the move you should almost never play. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is, of course, pawn to f6 check. That's the good stuff. And now, of course, after the king captures, we're going to capture here. And after king e7, we're going to capture on b6. And now our position will be winning. Yes, black will play rook to g6, but we're going to play rook b7 check, then bring our knight into the game. And, well, we're just going to be much, much better here. And not only that, we can create a lot of pass pawns here on the queen side. Black will not be able to take care of all of this. So instead, Magnus did not go for this. He played rook to d5, which allowed Duda a brief moment where he could have played a little bit better, for example, with king to d7, but Duda played king to f6, and he basically ran into the same line, only with a bit of a more active king. So here, rook captures on d6 was played, king captures on f5, rook captures on b6, rook to g6, not allowing Magnus to capture the a6 pawn as well, but now just a5. And it's a very tough to capture the rook, because if captures, let's say go after the rook, we just play c5, we have 2 connected pass pawns, of course completely winning for Magnus. So after a5, we have rook to d8, and now g4 check. Really a tough move to face for Duda, because the king is completely cut off, you don't have a move, and you have to accept the g4 pawn. So he captures it, but now knight g3 check. And if you don't want to give up a rook for nothing, because these 2 squares are taken, you have to capture the knight. So rook captures, king captures, now e4. Duda starts pushing his pass pawn. Now rook captures on a6. We have king e5, rook to b6. We have rook to g8 with check. King to f2, now f5. Duda is ready to push f4, e3, but Magnus is also pushing. We have a6, king to f4. Now comes rook to e6, not allowing Duda to advance this pawn to e3. So rook to g7, and now just c5. We have rook to d7, trying to get a check in, but rook to d6. Again, rooks cannot be traded off because these pawns are just too strong. So after rook to d6, Duda goes back, rook to g7, now rook to d4. Magnus still doesn't allow d3 check. So king to e5, and now rook to a4. With all of these moves, Magnus puts the rook behind the passed pawn, and now a7, a8 will win the game. It doesn't even matter, if you play rook to a7, yes, you block the passed pawn, but I mean just b4, b5, b6, and we win. Black does not have support to push these two pawns. So instead, after rook a4, we have f4 by Duda, but now a7. We have e3 check, king to f1, and now Duda just played king to d1, but I don't think he even played that. I think his time ran out on the clock, and then he just put the king somewhere. Maybe he was just holding it in his hand, but the position is, of course, completely lost regardless of what Duda plays, and this is the final position of the game. Interestingly, it's a forced checkmate in 6 moves. Magnus can bring a queen into the game, and you don't really have well, a lot of squares that you can use. You can play king captures on c5. We're going to play rook to c4 check, and after, let's say, king d6, queen to c6 check, and now it's very straightforward. King d7, rook to e4 check, king to f7, queen to e6 check, and after the king moves, king f8, we're going to deliver checkmate here, or any other series of moves. But there's really nothing after king to d5. The last move registered. Magnus wins, which means that after 9 rounds of the World Rapid Championship, because we had 5 rounds the first day, but only 4 rounds on the second day, and we're also only going to have 4 rounds on the third day. It's Magnus Carlsen in sole lead with 8 out of 9, I believe. Let me just check that one more time. No, with 7.5 out of 9, followed by 3 people on 7 points: Alexander Grishuk, Norbert Abdusatorov, and Yanni Ponishi. So I don't know if the pairings are out yet. It doesn't seem so. Probably some of the players are still playing, but as Magnus already faced Grishuk, it will be either Magnus versus Abdusatorov or Magnus versus Nepo. So we might see a return clash from the World Chess Championship match. The first game, the two of them will play after the World Chess Championship. So it's going to be very interesting, and tomorrow will be just a very, very, very tiresome day for all of them, and we'll see if Magnus can continue pushing with this strength even in the last day, because so far pretty much everything has been going his way, and it was a little bit dangerous against Alexander Grishuk, but in the end he did not allow Grishuk to grab a full point. That's the game. Tough break for Duda, but a nice one for Magnus. I would like to thank Checkmate Epilepsy, Catherine Maltriarch, Jack Schroeder, Jeffrey Redenor, and David Kimura for contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this wonderful event until it finishes. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.